The stars stretched forever over the empty space highway called the Orion Cargo Route. Jack Turner, a rough and tired space trucker, leaned back in the seat of his old freighter, the Rusty Star. The engines hummed quietly, the only sound breaking, the silence of the lonely road between distant worlds. Jack chewed a piece of stale gum and stared at the scanner. For hours, nothing but empty space. No ships, no signals. Just another long, boring haul. He was just about to nod off when the scanner beeped sharply. Jack sat up straight. A distress signal. Weak, fading, coming from a drifting ship just ahead. Jack frowned. He knew the rules. Out here, you didn't stop unless you had to. Pirates sometimes set traps with fake distress calls. Greedy slavers sometimes used bait to catch rescuers. But Jack also knew something else. Sometimes real people were out there, people who needed help. He rubbed his tired face and flipped the freighter toward the signal. "Let's see who's out there," he muttered. As he approached, the ship came into view. It was a small shuttle barely bigger than a lifeboat. Its hull was scarred and broken, one engine dead, the other flickering weakly. Jack switched on the comms. "This is Freighter Rusty Star," he said. "You in need of assistance?" No answer. Just a low, crackling sound. Jack hesitated. Common sense screamed at him to move on, but his heart said otherwise. With a sigh, he grabbed his tool belt and headed for the airlock. The shuttle's door groaned as it opened manually. Inside, the air was thin and cold, lights flickered weakly. And then he saw her. Curled up against the far wall, shivering, was a small figure, an alien girl. She looked almost human, but smaller, barely up to Jack's chest if she stood. Her skin was a soft silver blue and her hair shimmered like strands of starlight. She wore a simple torn tunic and her arms were wrapped around herself trying to stay warm. Her violet eyes stared at Jack, wide with fear. Jack raised his hands slowly. "Hey there," he said gently. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Jack knelt down a few feet away. "You alone?" he asked. She said nothing, only nodded once, very slightly. Jack felt a knot tighten in his chest. This girl wasn't just lost. She was scared. Maybe running from something or someone. He looked around the shuttle, broken wires leaking, pipes, cracked hull, no weapons, no supplies, no way she could survive much longer. Jack stood up. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you out of here." He reached out a hand. The girl hesitated. For a moment, Jack thought she would bolt deeper into the broken shuttle, but then, slowly, carefully, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were freezing cold. Jack wrapped his jacket around her small shoulders and guided her back to the Rusty Star. Inside his freighter, Jack set her down in the co-pilot seat. He fetched a blanket and a steaming cup of nutrient broth. The girl sipped carefully, her hands trembling. Jack didn't press her with questions. He just made sure she was warm, fed, and safe. After a long silence, he spoke. "Name's Jack," he said, tapping his chest. "Jack Turner," he pointed to her gently. "Your name?" The girl lowered her eyes. Silent. Maybe she didn't trust him yet. Maybe she couldn't speak his language. Jack shrugged and smiled. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to tell me. We'll get you to a safe place, no charge." He meant it. He didn't want payment, didn't expect thanks. Helping was just the right thing to do, especially out here where kindness was rarer than gold. As Jack set a course for the nearest safe starport, he noticed her watching him closely, not with fear anymore, but with something else. Wonder, like no one had ever helped her before without asking for something in return. Jack chuckled softly. "Yeah, you'll learn," he said to the stars outside. "Humans are strange that way." The girl pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, still silent but no longer shivering. Outside the window, the stars spun slowly past. A broken engine had brought her into his path. But Jack had a feeling their story was just getting started. Because sometimes in the wide, Empty road between the stars. A simple act of kindness could change everything. The rusty star floated quietly through the dark lanes of space, its old engines humming softly. Inside the small cockpit, Jack Turner glanced sideways at the silver-blue girl wrapped in his thick blanket. She hadn't spoken a word since he rescued her. Not a name, not a sound, only silent glances full of questions Jack couldn't answer. He sipped his coffee and cleared his throat. "All right," he said casually, trying not to scare her. "We're about 2 jumps away from Haven Station. Big, safe place. Good food, nice folks. You'll be okay there." The girl blinked slowly but said nothing. She kept her small hands tucked tightly under the blanket, as if she feared even moving too much might cause her trouble. Jack leaned back and scratched his chin. He had hauled rare metals, machine parts, even live cattle across half the known systems, but never a scared little alien, girl with no name. After a few silent minutes, Jack decided to try again. He pointed gently at himself. "Jack," he said. Then he pointed at her, raising his eyebrows with a smile. The girl hesitated. Her lips parted slightly. But no sound came out. Instead, she looked down at her hands and shook her head slowly. Jack's smile faded a little. "Don't worry," he said softly. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." The girl lifted her gaze just enough to meet his eyes. For the first time, there was a small spark there. Not fear, not sadness. Something else. Maybe trust. Maybe hope. Jack took it as a good sign. A while later, Jack set the autopilot and grabbed a packet of ration bars. He opened one and broke it in half, offering the piece to her. She hesitated only a moment before accepting it carefully, as if unsure it was real. She nibbled at the bar slowly, chewing, thoughtfully. Jack chuckled under his breath. "Not the best thing in the galaxy, huh?" he said. "But it keeps you breathing." She gave a tiny smile, the smallest smile Jack had ever seen. But it was real. It warmed the cold inside the freighter better than the heating coils ever could. Jack leaned forward and opened a small storage drawer. Inside was a stack of old sketch pads and pencils. He loved drawing on long trips, doodling ships, planets, silly creatures from his imagination. Now he had an idea. He tore a clean page and handed it to the girl along with a pencil. She looked at him curiously. Jack pointed at the paper. "Draw," he said simply. "Anything you want." The girl held the pencil awkwardly at first. Then slowly she began to move it across the page. Jack watched in quiet amazement as simple but beautiful lines formed under her hand. A star, a small, delicate flower, a house with a round door, and finally 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing side by side. Jack felt something tighten in his chest. She was telling him a story without words, her home, her dreams, her loneliness, and maybe her hope. He smiled warmly. "You're pretty good at that," he said. The girl smiled back, this time bigger, brighter. Jack tapped his chest again. "Jack," he repeated. Then he tapped the little stick figure of himself she had drawn. The girl hesitated, then tapped her own figure with the pencil. After a long pause, she drew a tiny symbol above her head, a swirl of stars. Jack frowned thoughtfully. "Stars, is that your name?" The girl tilted her head, thinking. Then she nodded once. Not exactly a name, but enough. Jack grinned. "All right, Star. Nice to meet you." The girl, Star, beamed. It was a simple name, a simple bond. But in the vast, cold loneliness of space, even the smallest bonds mattered more than gold. As the rusty star drifted closer to Haven Station, Jack leaned back in his seat. He should have felt relieved. But deep down, something gnawed at him. Why was Star alone out here? Why? No rescue beacon? Why so much fear in her eyes? Jack's gut told him this wasn't just a simple rescue. There was more, much more, and whatever it was coming for them both. Out there, beyond the quiet stars, Something dangerous waited, and Jack Turner knew. He wasn't just delivering cargo this time. He was delivering hope, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it away. The Haven Station lights glowed like a small sun in the dark emptiness of space. Jack Turner slowed the rusty star as he approached, sending his docking codes to the port control. Inside the cockpit, Star sat quietly beside him, the blanket still, wrapped around her small shoulders. She stared at the bright station with wide, uncertain eyes. Jack smiled gently. "It's safe," he said. "Plenty of folks, plenty of food. You'll be all right." But as the ship slid into the docking bay, Jack noticed something strange. A group of security officers stood waiting near the bay doors, too many for a simple landing. Their armor was dark, their faces hidden behind visors, and in their hands, they carried stun weapons set to capture mode. Jack's gut twisted sharply. Something wasn't right. The docking clamps locked onto the rusty star with a heavy thunk. Jack flicked off the engines and leaned close to Star. "Stay behind me," he whispered. She nodded quickly, clutching the blanket tighter. Jack opened the hatch slowly, stepping out onto the metal platform. The lead officer approached. "You the captain of this freighter?" the officer barked. Jack nodded carefully. "That's me." The officer glanced at Star, then back at Jack. "We received word about a stolen asset," he said coldly. "Description matches your passenger." Jack stiffened. "She's not cargo," he said. "She's a person." The officer sneered. "Not according to the claim filed by the Corsi Syndicate." Jack's blood ran cold. The Corsi Syndicate, one of the worst slaver groups in the galaxy. If they were after Star, it explained everything. The fear, the silence, the running. Jack stepped protectively in front of her. "She's under my protection," he said firmly. "You want her, you go through me." The officer smirked. "That can be arranged." He raised his weapon. In a blur of motion, Jack grabbed a loose wrench from his belt and hurled it at the nearest guard. Hit him. Hit the man square in the visor, sending him sprawling backward. "Run!" Jack shouted. Star didn't hesitate. She bolted down the nearest maintenance tunnel, Jack right behind her. The guards shouted and gave chase, blasters firing warning shots that sparked off the metal walls. Jack ducked low, weaving through narrow passages using every shortcut and back road he had learned over years of dirty port jobs. Star moved like a whisper, fast and silent. But Jack could hear the heavy boots pounding behind them, getting closer. They burst into an old storage bay, the air filled with the sharp smell of rust and oil. Jack slammed the door shut and jammed a metal pipe through the handles. It wouldn't hold for long. He turned to Star, breathing hard. "Okay," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "No more running. We have to think." Star looked up at him, her violet eyes shining with fear, but also something else. Determination. She pulled the blanket aside and reached into the folds of her torn tunic. From inside, she pulled out a small object, a smooth, black stone etched with glowing white symbols. Jack stared. "What is that?" Star held it out carefully. As she did, the air around them seemed to hum, like a low vibration deep in Jack's bones. He realized with a jolt, this wasn't just a pretty rock. It was powerful, important, and probably why the Corsi wanted her so badly. Jack ran a hand through his hair. "You're carrying something they want," he said slowly. "Something big." Star nodded. Her tiny hands clenched the stone tightly. She wasn't just a runaway. She was a target, a key to something much bigger than either of them understood. The door behind them rattled as the guards pounded on it, shouting threats. Jack looked at the girl, at the stone, at the slim chance they had left. He grinned tightly. "Well," he said, pulling a small blaster from his belt. "Guess it's not just a delivery job anymore." Star smiled, a real fierce smile. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting, and Jack realized something powerful. This girl, this silent spark in a cold galaxy, wasn't just trouble. She was hope, and he would fight the whole syndicate if he had to. Because some things were worth more than cargo. Some things were worth everything. The old storage bay was cold, and dark Jack Turner crouched behind a stack of rusty containers, his blaster ready in his hand. Star sat close beside him, clutching the glowing stone tightly against her chest. Through a crack in the door, Jack could see the shadows of the Corsair guards moving past, searching every corner of the port. "They won't stop," Jack whispered. "They'll tear this station apart to find you." Star lowered her head, guilt flashing in her violet eyes. Jack sighed and touched her shoulder lightly. "Hey," he said gently. "This isn't your fault." She looked up at him, her small face pale but determined. Even without words, she spoke volumes. She hadn't asked for help. She hadn't meant to bring danger to anyone. But now they were tied together, by choice and by chance. And Jack wasn't going to leave her behind. Not ever. They stayed hidden for hours. Jack worked on a plan while Star drew quietly on a piece of scrap metal with a piece of broken wire. When Jack peeked over her shoulder, he saw simple drawings, a starship flying. A small figure holding a stone, another figure, tall and strong, standing beside the first. Jack smiled despite the fear chewing at his gut. She was drawing them, together. Not captor and captive, not cargo. Friends. Family. Something stronger than blood. A bond forged not by power or promises, but by choice. Later, Jack found a hidden maintenance tunnel that led to the outer service docks. Old, abandoned routes most dock workers didn't even remember. It would be risky, but it was their best shot. He turned to Star. "You trust me?" he asked. Star nodded without hesitation. Jack's heart tightened in his chest. Out of all the souls she could have trusted, she had chosen him. A stubborn, half-broke space trucker with a rusty ship and a worn-out coat. He wasn't much, but he would be enough. He had to be. They crept through the narrow tunnels, moving in silence. Jack kept one hand on the wall, guiding them by memory. Star followed close behind, quick and light. At one point, a patrol passed overhead. Jack pulled her close, shielding her with his body. They held their breath together until the danger passed. Star's tiny hand clutched his jacket tightly, her heart beat a wild flutter against his side. When it was safe, she stepped back, her face flushed but brave. Jack gave her a small nod. "Good job, kid." She beamed at the praise. A bond, stronger with every step. Finally, they reached an old loading bay where a handful of battered ships sat forgotten. One of them, a small cargo shuttle, still had power. Jack's eyes lit up. "That's our ticket out," he said, but just as he moved toward it, the shadows shifted. Corsair bounty hunters stepped out from behind the crates, weapons raised. Jack cursed under his breath. A trap. The lead hunter grinned. "Hand over the girl, trucker," he snarled. "You can still walk away." Jack planted himself firmly in front of Star. "Not a chance," he growled. The hunters laughed. "You think you can protect her against all of us?" Jack glanced back at Star. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She just stood there calm and ready, the stone glowing brighter in her small hands, and Jack realized something else. He wasn't protecting her anymore. They were protecting each other. Jack raised his blaster. Star raised the stone, and together, without words, they charged forward, into the fight. The hunters never stood a chance, because this wasn't just a battle for survival anymore. It was a fight for something bigger, for freedom, for trust, for a future neither of them had dared hope for before, and no slaver, no syndicate, no hunter in the galaxy could break a bond like that. Blaster fire ripped through the old loading bay. Jack Turner ducked low, pulling Star behind a pile of broken cargo crates as plasma bolts shattered the air around them. The bounty hunters shouted orders, their heavy boots pounding closer with every second. Jack gritted his teeth. They couldn't stay here, they had to run. "Stay close," Jack barked over the noise. Without hesitation, Star clutched his hand tightly. Together they sprinted toward the narrow maintenance hatch at the back of the bay, the only way out. Behind them, shouts grew louder, shots slammed into the walls, spraying sparks like angry fireflies. But Jack didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. Not now. The hatch led into Iron Alley, a twisted maze of abandoned corridors and service tunnels deep inside Haven Station. Few dared to enter it, even fewer made it out without getting lost, or worse. Jack knew the risks, but he also knew the Corsi wouldn't follow easily through the old sector. It was their best chance. He yanked the hatch open and shoved Star inside, then he dived in after her, slamming it shut just as another blast exploded behind them. The narrow tunnel was dark and smelled of rust and oil. Perfect. Move, Jack whispered urgently. They ran through the shadows, the only light coming from the faint blue glow of Star's stone. Her small feet barely made a sound. Jack's boots pounded harder, every step echoing in the forgotten halls. They twisted, through broken passages, climbed over collapsed beams, and squeezed through gaps so tight even Jack's shoulders scraped the walls. The Corsi hunters chased them relentlessly, their angry voices bouncing off the metal like growling beasts. Jack led Star down a sharp left turn and skidded to a stop. A dead end. A collapsed tunnel. He cursed under his breath. Before he could think of another way, a blaster bolt hit the wall inches from his head. The bounty hunters had caught up. Star looked at Jack, eyes wide but steady. Jack glanced around. One option. Only one. Climb, he shouted, pointing to a broken maintenance ladder leading upward. Star scrambled up without fear, nimble and fast. Jack followed, the old ladder groaning under his weight. Blaster shots zipped past, tearing chunks of metal from the walls. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. At the top of the shaft, Jack kicked open a rusted grate and hauled Star up onto a wide catwalk overlooking the lower docks. The air here was thicker, filled with smoke and the hum of distant machinery. Far below, hundreds of ships waited. Freedom. If they could reach one. They sprinted across the catwalk, metal rattling under their feet. Hunters emerged from the shadows behind them, shouting and firing. One shot clipped Jack's shoulder, sending a burst of pain down his arm. He stumbled, gritting his teeth. Star grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. With surprising strength for someone so small, Jack laughed breathlessly. "You're tougher than you look," he muttered. She flashed a fierce little smile. They reached the end of the catwalk, only to find a wide gap where the bridge had collapsed. Jack looked down. Far below, a maintenance platform sat just within reach. If they jumped, he turned to Star. "You trust me?" he asked, breathing hard. She nodded without hesitation. Jack scooped her into his arms. "No turning back," he said, and he jumped. The world blurred. Wind roared past his ears. For one heart-pounding second, Jack thought they wouldn't make it. But then, with a bone-jarring crash, they landed hard on the platform. Jack rolled to absorb the impact, cradling Star tightly. They tumbled to a stop against a crate. Jack groaned, sitting up. Star blinked at him, her small hands still gripping his jacket. He grinned weakly. "Next time, we take the stairs." She laughed, a real soft laugh that made everything else fade for a moment. No time to rest, more footsteps, more hunters. Jack pulled Star to her feet and bolted for the nearest docked shuttle, a battered old cargo ship left unattended. Perfect. He slapped the emergency open panel. The ramp hissed down slowly. Too slowly. Behind them, hunters rounded the corner. Jack spun, firing blindly with his blaster, forcing them to dive for cover. "Go, Star!" he shouted. Star ran up the ramp without looking back. Jack fired 2 more shots, then sprinted after her. The moment his boots hit the ramp, he punched the door controls. The ramp groaned shut, just as plasma bolts ricocheted off the outer hull. Inside, alarms blared as Jack sprinted to the cockpit. Star was already there, strapping herself into the co-pilot's chair with fast, practiced movements. Jack's heart swelled with pride. He slammed his hand onto the launch button. The old ship shuddered, engines whining, but it lifted off, tearing away from the dock and into the wild darkness of space. As the stars opened up, around them Jack leaned back, breathing hard. He glanced at Star. She was bruised, dirty, exhausted, but smiling. Really smiling. And Jack smiled too. They had made it, together, against slavers, against bounty hunters, against fear itself. They had survived Iron Alley, and Jack knew, no matter what waited out there in the endless stars, he and Star would face it side by side, because some bonds weren't made by blood. They were made by choice, by trust, by the simple, stubborn refusal to give up. The stars stretched like silver rivers across the dark sky. Inside the small borrowed cargo ship, Jack Turner finally let himself breathe. They were safe, for now. The Corsai hunters were left behind, and Haven Station shrank into a tiny dot behind them. Jack slumped in the pilot's seat, rubbing the sore muscles in his shoulder. Beside him, Star sat quietly, swinging her feet slightly above the floor. The ship hummed around them, old but steady. There were no alarms, no shouts, no fear, only silence. And in that silence, something changed, something unspoken but powerful. Star pulled the glowing stone from her pocket and cradled it gently. The soft light bathed her face in a warm, golden glow. Jack watched her, curiously. "You all right, kid?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Star nodded. Then, very carefully, she reached into the pouch tied at her waist and pulled out something else. A small crystal, different from the black stone. This one was clear as glass, but deep inside, tiny stars seemed to swirl, as if a whole galaxy was trapped inside it. Star cupped it in her palms, holding it out to Jack. A gift. A thank you. Jack blinked in surprise. He held up his hands. Hey, I didn't help you for payment," he said. "I didn't do it to get anything back." Star tilted her head. Her eyes, those bright violet pools, looked straight into his soul. Without a word, she placed the crystal in his hand and closed his fingers around it. A simple gesture. A quiet truth. Not payment, gratitude, something sacred, something deeper than any deal. As Jack touched the crystal, a gentle warmth spread through him. Not burning, not blinding. It was a feeling he hadn't known in years. Home, trust, belonging. Images flickered briefly. In his mind, fields of silver grass, towers of shining crystal, stars born and dying in silence, memories not his own, a glimpse of her world, her people, her dreams. Jack's throat tightened. He closed his hand over the crystal carefully, holding it like something precious and fragile. He looked at Star. "You didn't have to," he said, voice thick. Star smiled softly and pressed her forehead lightly against his chest. A gesture he didn't fully understand but somehow knew was important. A sign of the deepest gratitude among her. Kind. Jack rested his hand gently on her head. "No matter what happens," he said quietly, "I've got your back." They spent the next few hours in quiet peace. Star curled up on one of the seats and drifted to sleep, the blanket wrapped around her small form. Jack kept the ship on course, watching the stars drift by, the crystal resting safely in his pocket. He thought about everything that had happened, the market, the chase, the hunters. He thought about the choice he made without even thinking, and he realized something simple but true. In a galaxy filled with deals and debts, sometimes real kindness had no price, it just was, like breathing, like family, like the stubborn, beautiful refusal to give up on someone, even a stranger, especially a stranger. When Star stirred awake, blinking sleep from her eyes, Jack smiled. "Morning," he said. She yawned and stretched like a small cat. Jack pointed at the navigation screen. "We're a few hours from the free zones," he said. "Places where the Corsai can't reach you." Star smiled brightly and nodded. Hope bloomed in, her eyes pure and fierce. Jack chuckled softly. "Yeah," he said. "Freedom's a good thing." He leaned back in his chair, feeling lighter than he had in years. No ship full of gold, no army behind him. Just a simple promise made in the cold void. To protect, to fight, to believe. And somehow, that felt more valuable than anything in the universe. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a river of silver dust in the black sea of space. Jack Turner leaned forward in his chair, steering the old cargo ship toward the free zones. Star sat beside him, her small hands folded neatly in her lap, a peaceful smile on her face. For the first time since Jack had met her, she didn't look afraid. She looked free. And Jack realized something deep inside him had changed too. He wasn't just hauling cargo anymore. He was carrying something far greater. A life. A future. A promise. As they entered the free zones, Jack guided the ship into a bustling outpost filled with ships of all sizes. Traders, explorers, settlers. No Corsai Syndicate flags here. No bounty hunters watching every move. Just people living their lives without fear. Star pressed her face against the window, wide-eyed at the colorful markets, the strange foods, the bright banners fluttering in the artificial breeze. Jack chuckled. "You'll like it here," he said. "Freedom's messy, but it's yours." They landed smoothly. Jack turned to her. "All right, Star, this is it." He ruffled her hair gently. "You're safe now. You can start fresh. Make your own choices." Star looked up at him. There was happiness in her eyes, but also something else. Sadness, like saying goodbye to something precious. Jack opened the hatch, stepping down onto the bright platform. Star followed, her small hand slipping into his without thinking. Together they walked into the crowd. Vendors called out. Musicians played lively tunes. Children ran laughing between market stalls. Life. Real life. Star clutched the small crystal she had given him earlier. It still pulsed faintly with a light that was somehow tied to both of them now, a bond that distance could never break. Jack knelt down to her level. "You're gonna do great, kid," he said, voice rougher than he wanted. Star looked at him long and hard. Then she did something that caught Jack completely off guard. She pressed the crystal against his chest, right over his heart, and whispered her first word in his language. "Protector." Jack froze. The crystal flared with light, then faded softly, settling into a quiet, warm glow. People around them paused, whispering. Some bowed their heads in respect. A few gasped, because they recognized what had just happened. The ancient right of her people, the chosen protector. Not just a friend, not just a hero, but someone marked by destiny, someone trusted forever. Jack stood slowly, stunned. He opened his mouth to argue, to say he was just a trucker, nothing more. But the words didn't come, because somehow deep down, he knew it was true. He wasn't just a man hauling scrap between planets anymore. He was something bigger. Now, because he had made a choice without thinking about reward or glory, he had simply chosen to be kind. And sometimes, that simple choice changed the course of history. Star smiled up at him one last time, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. Free. Strong. Home. Jack watched her go, his heart full. Then he turned back toward the rusty star, the crystal resting against his chest, a silent promise that no matter where the road led, he was never alone. He started the engines, feeling the old ship rumble to life under his hands. Another haul, another long, lonely road between the stars. But now, every time he looked into the vast darkness, he smiled, because he knew somewhere out there, across the endless sky, one little alien girl remembered him, and an entire race whispered his name with gratitude. And in every corner of the galaxy, a new story began to spread. Beware the humans, for their kindness binds stronger than chains, and their promises shine brighter than any star.